Dustin Baker, VikesNow, the post-week 3 edition, September 26th. The Minnesota Vikings moved to 2-1 atop the NFC North with a suddenly crowded house. They could have been in the basement at 1-2. That would have been dreadful if they would have lost to the Lions. And I've been doing this Vikings stuff, at least as a fan, since 1996. And I can usually get a drop on a game by about the second quarter, whether or not they're going to win or lose. And I am one of the folks that didn't think they were going to win. Starting to prepare in my head for a new expectation for the team, a new ceiling. But they rectified their defensive sins, among other items, and they're back in the mix at 2-1 thanks to some late game heroics. So I want to explain. I think I got out 6 or 7 reasons why this win was so vital to go to 2-1. As Kevin O'Connell said yesterday afternoon, going across the continent now, take on an angry Saints team that just lost to the lowly Panthers. We'll get into it. The first one, why the Vikings win over the Lions was so vital. Had they lost to Detroit, I don't care how good Detroit says they are now or how cool the coach is, there is still a stigma. You would be waking up Monday morning, driving into work, thinking we lost to the damn Lions. You'd get to work, and Packer fans would say to you, your team lost to the Lions. And it immediately dampens any enthusiasm you'd have about the rest of the way because, you guessed it, you lost to the Lions. However, that did not happen. It's a moot point. And in the last 2 weeks, the Vikings have led for 45 seconds worth of football games, and they got a even split 1-1 out of it, and we'll take it. When I say the wouldn't be able to shed the stigma, I think that's mostly from casual fans or folks that want to give you a hard time that aren't Vikings fans. However, it's real. And as you watching this show, you wouldn't be considered a casual fan, but they're out there, and most of the world doesn't care that the Lions suddenly have a good defense, that they were on Hard Knocks, and they are trending upward. They do not care. So you would have had to associate a Vikings loss with a team that they usually take care of business against. But again, that's all moot. They survived the Lions and that naughty L that would have filled the win-loss column. So, number one, no matter how you would have diced it, you would have lost to the Lions and people would have laughed at that, and it wouldn't have felt right. Do you know why it wouldn't have felt right? This is number two, and I'm going to give the proverbial, if you want to shut off the show after this or remember nothing, this is the one to listen to. These Vikings were at home against the Lions. They needed to win because they were at home. Playoff contending football teams, good football teams, take care of business at home, especially against the Lions. So, if the NFL schedule makers would have said, bada bing, we're going to put this game in Detroit, Ford Field, week 3, and the Vikings did some bullshit and lost, it would have stunk, but it wouldn't have been Armageddon. You would have been like, well, they were on the road. Vikings don't usually play well on the road. Go get them next week, Tiger, in London. But this game was in a place that used to be a fortress for the Vikings. I've tweeted this before and written about it. From 2016, which is when the building opened, until 2019, through 2019, I should say. So those 4 seasons, the Vikings had the second best home field advantage behind Tom Brady's Patriots. Then the pandemic hit. Fans weren't allowed in 2020. And since then, it vanished. Now it's creeped up again in a good way in 2022, so you have that to look forward to. But going to that building as fans and then the team playing in it used to win at home, and a lot of times it wasn't even close. You'd get that patented Zimmer 24/7 lead, and that's history, baby. Vikings are going to win. That vanished in 2020 and 2021. In those 2 seasons, they were 500. Suddenly, they're 2-0 again, so perhaps it's on the way back. The loss against the Lions would have been unforgivable, close to season ending, at least emotionally, because you lost at home to Detroit. But it did not happen, so again, moot point. Another one, this one is general, bird's eye view. They bounced back from the lifelessness on primetime football. How many times on this show in the past week and a half have I said that on Monday Night Football, the Vikings in the last, my goodness, 20, 25 years are not good on the road? Plain and simple, if the team isn't named the Chicago Bears and the Vikings are traveling to a different destination, they've lost 7 straight times. Now, so we kind of expected that. When you look back and you say, yeah, that was coming. The Eagles are damn good. Probably the front runner in the NFC to take on the Bills in the AFC. So you kind of gave them a mulligan. You said, all right, Kevin O'Connell wasn't ready for the bright lights. He's not some wizard that's going to even solve Monday Night Football. But the way they lost, they looked anemic, lifeless. They bounced back from it against Detroit, especially in the face of adversity when the game wasn't going swimmingly in Week 3. Minnesota easily could have lost that game to the Lions if the Lions weren't, the ultimate Kenny Rogers gambling every fourth down. But the moral of the story is that in the fourth quarter, trailing by, I think at that point, 10 points, they were also trailing by 14 points in the first quarter or whatever it was, they bounced back from lifelessness. And they had to win, whether it was like you watched the Sunday night game last night, just a putrid display of gridiron happenings. The Broncos and 49ers didn't good. I've got news, didn't play well, neither team. I got news for you. Broncos fans probably don't care. They're telling themselves this morning that we beat the 49ers. Team was in the Super Bowl 3 years ago, baby. A win's a win. Just like that, and the Vikings were more impressive than the Broncos. They needed to win to bounce back from the shitty performance against the Eagles, and they did it, 28-24. Here's another one. So I told you I was anxietal in about the third quarter, thinking, I don't know if they're going to pull this off. And I think I mentioned this on Friday. If they would have lost to the Lions, I swear to God on this show at this very moment, I'd be telling you they are at best a 9-8 team, maybe 8-9, 10-7 if the ball bounces a few lucky ways. And they're not to be taken seriously. If you would have lost at home to Detroit, your new ceiling was similar to what 2020 and 21 were, which is a decent playmaking offense that gets hot at times with this defense that is a pile of rubbish that doesn't stop anybody. Now, those fears can be tapered. They're still not, to me, a Super Bowl contender until the defense gets its shit figured out and stops surrendering chunk plays and whatever the shell defense is being called. But winning reaffirms to me that my 11-6 prediction is within the grasp. And here's another thing to consider. Teams can get better throughout a season. Nobody on the Vikings, or at least with the Vikings, had played a 3-4 defense before September 11th, 2022. Well, it's probably taking time to acclimate it. The Patrick Mahomes-led Chiefs, like an annual tradition in Kansas City, is the defense plays no good until about November something. They turn it on. They go to the postseason. Sometimes they win a Super Bowl. Sometimes they lose in the AFC Championship. The Vikings can be like that too. This defense that makes you, spit nails out of the gate here can get better, especially getting pressure on the quarterback because that was basically in absentia. Like Goff was sacked 0 times, and it felt like there was zilch for pressure in the pocket. But I'm here to report, this doesn't have to be the way that it is the rest of the way. It can grow. It can get better. In fact, every good football team that trudges towards the playoffs indeed gets better if they're ultimately going to win a game or two while they're there. But the ceiling for this team, had they lost yesterday, I swear I would have pounded this kitchen table right here for 9-8 at best, 8-9 probably more realistic. But those fears are vanquished because in sports, if you find a way to win, you get the benefit of the doubt. The next one is winning merely kept pace with the Vikings' primary foes. When they ended up winning, I think I tweeted out walking out of US Bank Stadium, well, let's go Buccaneers, huh? Because when a team that you hate, in this case, the green and gold one, is going up against a Tom Brady-led team, you can feel somewhat confident that Brady and the gang are going to take care of business. Of course, they didn't. The Bucs lost 14-12 to the Packers. So now we're in this little arms race that involves Green Bay at 2-1, the lovely Bears at 2-1, which nobody's taking seriously, and the Vikings at 2-1. Because of tiebreakers, the Vikings on Monday morning and the rest of the week will sit on top on the lid of the NFC North. But if they lost, they'd be the only team hanging out in the basement. And how would that feel? How would that look? Not good. It's basically an arms race with the Packers right now for a home field playoff game, foremost. We only had one of those in the history of U.S. Bank Stadium, which ended up pretty peachy, if you'll recall. And then the Bears are 2-1. I don't know that can even really be considered a serious thing, or you could say it without laughing. But to keep pace with the NFC North, in particular the Packers, the Vikings would had to win yesterday. Otherwise, they would be 1-2 going across the Atlantic Ocean and in the basement of the NFC North. But that did not happen once again. And second to last one is that Kirk Cousins, he delivered another game-winning drive. He's had multiple of those in Minnesota. But what do we say on this show? Nobody cares. He had 7 touchdown passes in 2021 when the game was tied or trailing within 8 points in the fourth quarter. Let me rephrase that. In 2021, in the fourth quarter of games, Kirk Cousins delivered 7 touchdown passes when the game was tied or his team was trailing by 8 points or fewer. It's pretty good, isn't it? Yes, it was second best in the league last year behind Justin Herbert. But the defense messed it all up multiple times last year. The big examples are against the same Lions at Ford Field and that game against the Ravens, you'll recall. That Cousins did his theatrics, did what he was supposed to do in the fourth quarter, late in the fourth quarter, and then the Vikings found a way to just mess it all up. Same thing happened against the Cardinals in week 2. He led a drive that gave Greg Joseph a reasonable game-winning field goal. Joseph missed it. So that's the difference right there. If you corral all 3 of those wins between a playoff team and then the garbage that we had at 8-9, that would have been 11-6. Cousins is doing his part. But here's the big thing. You know vividly, and I know vividly, that he sucked on Monday night, especially in the second half. Both things can exist. Cousins can be damn good most of the time. He can also have terrible outings, about 1 per year, that make you scratch your head and wonder why he even plays football. You don't have to pick this camp that says, "Oh, I'm Kirk Cousins forever," or "Oh, he sucks, they need to find a rookie quarterback who will take him to the promised land." You have to accept what the guy is at $35 million per season, which is about the 8th or 9th highest paid quarterback in all of the land. There will be a game, perhaps a game and a half, where he is not good, does not look like an NFL quarterback, and it pisses you off. Other than that, he does shit like he did against the Lions, where he authors these fourth quarter theatrics, this heroism, and they win if they play defense. They had that final drive there where Josh Metellus picked off the Goff pass, and I think everybody in the stadium thought it was going to be a redux of 2021 where the defense found a way to let them score. They didn't, so it's a moot point. But the moral of the story on Mr. Cousins is that he did this over and over last year and has since he became a Viking. It's just the team found a way to mess it up so you don't remember him doing it. In fact, since he joined the Vikings, in that same stat about the fourth quarter, tied or trailing by 8 or fewer points, he leads the NFL in touchdown passes with 16 since he became a Viking. If you say, "Oh yeah, that doesn't count though," then you are ignoring mathematics. You simply conveniently say, "Yeah, doesn't feel the same way," and you have no reasonable explanation for why. He delivers when it counts, but he also has 1 game, perhaps 2, where he doesn't look very good at all. So accept it. If you don't like that, fine. Then we can go try what was it some of you wanted the draft last year, Justin Fields, straight up and get Fields. We can try something like that. However, Cousins right now, for what Kwesi Adolpho-Mensah inherited, was probably the best thing going, especially in a shitty quarterback draft class. And then my final one is kind of what I usually have at the end of these segments. Is kind of a throwaway one, is that yesterday the Vikings proved that they can win without Justin Jefferson doing everything. The guy had 3 catches for 14 yards. If you're a fantasy manager, you probably know all about it, especially if you were starting him. It wasn't very good. He was double covered a lot of the time, but yesterday was important to prove that, hey, Adam Thielen, it still works here. Get him the ball. He can catch it still, and he can score. And then Osborne coming through again as a Viking in the clutch in a game-winning touchdown. Last year's was a walk-off against the Panthers. But it was important to prove to themselves that they can win a football game without Jefferson being the dagger that does everything through the air. All right, so that's the big talking points of things that are vital. Is had they lost, it would have been a loss to the Lions, which would have ruined your week, and everybody else would have been like, oh, look at these guys still losing to the Lions. Wow, they're really serious. At home, that's the biggest one of this all. The biggest of this entire list is that the Vikings were at home and had to win because they were at home. They bounced back from Monday night lifelessness, which was a requirement if you want to be taken seriously. I would have personally readjusted my expectation for them if they lost to about 8-9. They didn't lose, so it's a moot point. They had to keep pace in this arms race in the NFC North. Every team except the Lions is 2-1. Cousins did Cousins things. He did the fourth quarter comeback thing. It's just that you happen to notice it because the defense didn't muck it all up. And then they can win without Justin Jefferson having 170 receiving yards. Those are the things that I find vital. We'll be back throughout the week. Probably one more tomorrow talking about some of the takeaways from this win. Wednesday with Josh Fry. And then we'll get into the Saints stuff as the pond gets crossed by the Minnesota Vikings on early Sunday morning. All right, Skol, baby.